Surprised me that Adam Something missed that, actually. This is so bad. How did Adam Something miss that? Okay, so Adam Something doesn't seem to want to say anything about this. My understanding is that this East-West divide is exaggerated in the Gravel Institute video. There's a bit more nuance to it. For example, this is not GDP per capita, this is in millions. This is just total GDP. What? This is not even the right title to give the graph. What? This is not GDP per capita. This is there's no way it's millions of dollars per capita. There's Adam's video on the Gravel Institute. How the Gravel Institute lies to you.
Hello everyone. Today we are going to take a look at a video titled How America Funded Ukraine's Neo-Nazis by the channel.
So I watched this video from the Gravel Institute last week because the pro-Russian nerds in my chat were really insistent I watch it. Most of it seemed okay. They did seem to exaggerate the claims that of the neo-Nazis being powerful in government from the perspective of and we looked it up, like Svoboda. Most of it seemed okay, question mark. Well, yeah, let me finish my sentence. I remember that the idea that played way too hard in the whole government is a neo-Nazi thing, because we looked up the seats in parliament. Svoboda has 1 seat in their parliament. However, I didn't look specifically into the claims of members of Svoboda and I forgot the other far-right party being offered important seats in government, but those seemed legit, and it's fair to criticize them. And way too hard in their funding as of part. Yeah, that one was bad as well. I think I criticized it live when we were watching it. But the first part focuses on how after 2014, specific members of the far-right parties were given important seats in government, which, it's fair to criticize that. That was a big part of the video.
Called the Gravel Institute. And just who are the Gravel Institute? We're building the infrastructure to beat right-wing propaganda outlets like PragerU on their own turf. With concise 5-minute videos from authoritative presenters, from Bernie Sanders to Chelsea Manning, we're pushing non-traditional audiences to the left. And to fight a behemoth like Prager, with huge ad budgets and millions of subscribers, we need you on board. Join us. So that's nice. They're trying to be a
I love how they glossed over the 2014 invasion by just saying then Russia annexed Crimea.
leftist counterweight to PragerU, a massive right-wing disinformation channel. Fighting disinformation online is especially important nowadays in light of the invasion of Ukraine. Russia has been pumping out an ungodly amount of lies and misinformation, outdoing outlets even like PragerU by an order of magnitude. And PragerU is no small player either. They really put it all out there. They're aggressively pro-capitalism, anti-Palestinian, anti-big government, aka social programs for non-whites, and anti-taxing high-income earners, and they also have a few things to say about black crime, the left, Antifa, and so on and so forth. But the secret to PragerU's success is not found in their political positions. In fact, if you laid them out bare, most people would see them for the lunatics that they are. The secret to PragerU's success lies in their presentation. Lies. Pun intended, I guess. It might not come as a surprise to most of you, but Prager University is not here to educate people, contrary to their description. They are here to push a specific set of
War on boys. Oh no, and the graphic. It's like a boy turning into a girl. No!
Economic and political agendas, and they rarely do this through outright lies. Rather, they twist information, leave out or de-emphasize inconvenient facts, overemphasize convenient facts, mislead you with disingenuous presentation of statistics, and they use loaded, emotional language to prime you for their conclusions, among other things, all in service of furthering their agenda. And YouTubers like Sean or Vosh already did a number of excellent takedowns of their lies, which you should definitely check out afterwards.
I'm streaming right now.
All this being said, PragerU doesn't have to try too hard to disseminate misinformation. This is due to their target audience, namely US conservatives, a group whose worldviews are based mostly on emotionally held positions. And then those conservatives go out looking for justifications for their feelings, which PragerU is happy to provide. So as a conservative, if you simply hate black people, let's say, you won't be looking at the history of systemic discrimination, the lingering effects of redlining, Jim Crow, slavery, and so on, to try and contextualize and perhaps eliminate your bias. Instead, you'll be watching Police Go Where the Crime Is by PragerU, which confirms your biases of black people being violent, criminal savages who don't work and abandon their children.
In the 75 largest U.S. counties, about 60% of robbery and murder defendants are black, even though blacks comprise only 15% of the population in those counties. In New York City, blacks make up 73% of all shooting victims, though they are 23% of the city's population. In Chicago in 2016, there were 4,300 shooting victims, almost all black. Among the 24 victims under the age of 12, was a 3-year-old shot on Father's Day who is now paralyzed for life, and a 10-year-old shot on Labor Day, whose pancreas and spleen were ripped apart.
In short, PragerU has it rather easy, preaching to a friendly audience preconditioned by the conservative media industrial complex, having suppressed their critical thinking skills as much as possible, so they will accept any bogus graph, half-truth, and outright falsehood as the capital T truth in service of the conservative agenda. For PragerU, it would be much more difficult to propagandize to a leftist audience, since that group is generally more aware of history and socioeconomics, by and large have better critical thinking skills, and would be more prone to calling them out on their bullshit. If we had a Stalinist PragerU, let's say, they would need to be much more subtle, using every opportunity for plausible deniability, phrasing statements and questions neutrally but in a very leading context, and so on and so forth. Otherwise, their core audience would be made up of people with the following characteristics: the alpha and omega of their worldview.
So I was wondering why he was talking so much about PragerU, and now we see it. Okay, yeah, he's setting it up. He's setting it up that Gravel Institute is the PragerU of the left. That's where he's working towards. That's why he's saying that it needs to be like more subtle, etc., etc. It needs plausible deniability. It needs to seem reasonable.
Being US bad, the fetishization of the Soviet Union and thinking it achieved communism or was progressing towards it despite reality, the bizarre reverence of countries that are opposed to the US like North Korea, Cuba, Syria, and so on, just because they're opposed to the US, and branding all their opponents as fascists to justify every action against them and then denying the actual fascist actions of the governments they support. In common parlance, we call these people tankies. The name comes from the Soviet Union rolling tanks into countries to crack down on anti-Soviet protests. You might have guessed, but these people aren't leftists. They are Nazis painted red for all intents and purposes. And so, the Gravel Institute. Let's take a look at this video of theirs. In the spirit of Sean, the video is linked in the description. Feel free to check it out to make sure I'm not misrepresenting any of their points. And just to clarify, this video came out 6 days before the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Ukraine. You've probably heard about that country a lot. For the last few years, Ukraine has been one of the most important conflict points in the world. It's the site of a proxy war between Russia and the United States.
Okay, so we're 20 seconds in and we already have a problem. Ukraine is the site of a proxy war between Russia and the United States. A proxy war is when two larger powers battle each other through smaller, local forces that they control or heavily influence, all in service of their geopolitical interests. But in the case of Ukraine, this is incorrect. The Ukrainian government is supported by the US and other Western nations, but they are by no means proxies of the US. They are a democratic government that came under attack by actual Russian proxies and the Russian army itself, at which point they asked for help and they got it. Just because Ukraine defending itself against Russian imperialism coincides with Western interests of not having Russian imperialism doesn't make this conflict a proxy war. So right off the bat, this is a serious misrepresentation by the Gravel Institute. Imagine
I don't know if I agree. Like, okay, let me specify, because this is like a nuanced thing. I agree with how he doesn't like it being Ukraine being called a U.S. proxy. It makes it sound like Ukraine is a U.S. puppet and plays into that bullshit like Russian propaganda. This I agree with with Adam something on, but technically, apart from the like emotional weight of calling something a proxy, factually in reality it fits the definition of a proxy war. What I mean by this is that we've called, with the hindsight of history, we look at wars where say like the opposite happened. Instead of a pro-Western government being democratically elected, a pro-USSR, a pro-communist government was democratically elected, and then it was the U.S. funding and arming like opposition to it, and the USSR funding and arming the like government. It was, in hindsight, we still called it a proxy war. But I do agree that you shouldn't be like minimizing Ukraine's agency in this. Russia is directly involved, so it can't by definition count as a proxy war. No. The video Adam something is criticizing here is from before Russia's invasion. We're looking at the moment where it was just the Donbass independentists being Russia's proxy, and Ukraine fighting them with Western support. So like, if you remove this idea that a proxy has no agency, I don't think. But I don't really care about framing it as a proxy war. It's something. It's something I've done myself on stream. I've called it a proxy war, and not in the sense of removing Ukraine's agency, but in the sense that Western interests do perceive it as a place to stop Russian interests, and that is, I think, a big part of the Western involvement in the war. So like I agree with Adam's point, but it's like more of a semantic problem fundamentally. Like it depends on what like weight you give to the term proxy war, what definition you give it. I do, in hindsight, though, agree that you can make a point about the Gravel Institute not necessarily being good faith about their definition of proxy war.
If Czechoslovakia resisted the Nazis as the latter annexed the Sudetenland and they got military equipment and training from the UK or something, would that make it a proxy war between Germany and the UK? Of course not, that would be ridiculous. But it would be a great opportunity for Nazi propaganda to try and discredit Czechoslovakia and justify the invasion, saying how Czechs are just pawns of the English and how their resistance is bringing war to Europe for no good reason. If the Czechs just...
I would still call it a proxy war, that's the thing. But I understand that this is just like a disagreement on definitions. I'd still call it a proxy war in this situation, not to discredit the resistance to the Sudetenland annexation. I would rather call it that way simply because, say, like the UK is arming them. The UK sees it as a way to indirectly stop Nazi German aspirations. They're using the legitimate, it doesn't delegitimize the resistance, just as the US and other countries using Ukraine to fight back against Russia doesn't delegitimize Ukraine's fight. But I think it's fair to call it what it is.
Just stop fighting us, there will be peace. We had a vote in the Sudeten and people do want to join us, so it's all good. Right.
Russia could launch an attack on Ukraine any day now.
We are ready and all of NATO is ready.
But it's also a place most people don't really know a lot about. So the story we hear about Ukraine's history and its conflict today has very little relationship to reality. I'm going to tell you a story about modern Ukraine, but this is also a story about America and how American money and weapons ended up in the hands of these guys, the neo-Nazis and ultranationalists of Ukraine's far right.
Wait, did you catch that? They just moved the goalposts. How America funded Ukraine's neo-Nazis versus how American money and weapons ended up in the hands of these guys. Those two statements have very different implications. The first implies a deliberate effort from the US to arm Ukrainian Nazis, while the second suggests that arming neo-Nazis wasn't the intention, only an unfortunate side effect. And slimy rhetorical tricks like these should be familiar to anyone who has ever watched Prager University.
Wait, did they do that? I missed the first part. I remember them taking the reasonable stance of there's a problem with the money flowing down into neo-Nazi groups, and I didn't remember them saying how America funded Ukraine's neo-Nazi.
To reality. I'm going to tell you a story about modern Ukraine, but this is also a story about America and how American money and weapons ended up in the hands of these guys, the neo-Nazis and ultranationalists of Ukraine's far right.
Wait, did you catch that? They just moved the goalposts. How America funded Ukraine's neo-Nazis.
Wait, is it? Video unavailable. No! They privated the video! Oh, no! Update, the Gravel Institute just privated their video. Good for them, better a month late than never. As of the 27th of March, they put it back up again. As of the 28th of March, they privated it again. The market. To be fair, like, yeah, and Adam something is right. Like, good for them. If the video's problematic, yeah, take it down. No, I just wanted, like, what was the title to the video? Like, why is Adam something saying that they moved the goalpost? I don't get it.
Ready and all of NATO is ready.
But it's also a place most people don't really know a lot about. So the story we hear about Ukraine's history and its conflict today has very little relationship to reality. I'm going to tell you a story about modern Ukraine, but this is also a story about America and how American money and weapons ended up in the hands of these guys.
God damn, I don't remember the name of the title of the original video. Is there like a screenshot or something? It's shown in the video. I don't remember when, but it's in there. How America funded. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, the fucking the title of the video. Yeah, yeah. Adam, something is right. This is slimy. Going from how America funded Ukraine's neo-Nazis to how American money and weapons ended up in the hands of these guys. It's the part that worries me with going like too far with clickbait video titles. It's something I have to be careful about, because it's way too easy to end up looking dishonest like this, or by being dishonest. It is dishonest.
Nazis, while the second suggests that arming neo-Nazis wasn't the intention, only an unfortunate side effect. And slimy rhetorical tricks like these should be familiar to anyone who has ever watched Prager University.
Think about the even greater number of Palestinians who are now homeless in Gaza because Hamas choose to hide weapons in residential buildings. And when naive American and European NGOs offer millions to rebuild Gaza, who do you think will get that money? It won't be you. The people who really deserve it and need it. It will be the leaders of the Hamas gang and their friends who will add new rooms to their fancy villas, rather than rebuild homes, purchase coronavirus vaccines, or provide social services for their people. And the peace you so deserve, the peace which could have been possible when Israel withdrew entirely from the Gaza Strip in 2005, will be even further out of reach.
Well, it looks like all that aid we're sending to Palestinians is ending up in the hands of extremists. Therefore, we should stop giving money and aid to Palestinians and just let Israel invade the Gaza Strip in a special military operation where they de-Islamisticize the area in order to finally bring peace to the Middle East, one could say. Though for some reason I highly doubt Gravel Institute would agree with stopping aid to Palestinians. Funny how that works.
Let's start in 1991, when Ukraine became fully independent from the Soviet Union.
That is a very fair parallel.
And independence was tough. After the fall of communism, the economies of post-Soviet republics were falling apart.
Minor point here, but while in common parlance we do refer to the end of the Soviet Union as the fall of communism, that is incorrect. The Soviet Union was a state-capitalist oligarchy at best and never even came close to abolishing the state, currency or social classes, as in communism. I expect a channel fancying itself as leftist to be more precise with its leftist terms.
State institutions were being hollowed out. A so-called gangster capitalism was becoming dominant. So in the 1990s, Ukraine's economy and quality of life collapsed, and it's never really gotten better. Adjusted for inflation, Ukraine's GDP per capita was higher in 1990 than it was in 2020. Health outcomes are abysmal. In 2019, the life expectancy of Ukrainian men was lower than in Syria, Iraq, and North Korea.
First off, I'm glad Gravel Institute has such unwavering trust in demographic data provided by the Syrian and North Korean governments. Very noble. Second, according to the World Bank data they cite, male life expectancy in Ukraine is currently at an all-time high, even with an ongoing war inside the country where lots of men tend to die. So by their metric, male life expectancy should be a relative success story, not abysmal as they put it. What a strange inconsistency in their rhetoric. Third, the choice of countries on the graph. You might think a comparison with Poland, Russia or Hungary or other Eastern European countries would be more informative since they are similar in terms of demographics, geopolitics, history and so on. Why bring up these random countries from different corners of the world? Why not Eastern European countries? Well, because if you put those on the graph, you get this. Countries that used to be in the Soviet sphere of influence but broke away very early and fully integrated into the West have much higher life expectancies than Ukraine or even Russia. And then some cynical person might come along and point out how being aligned with the decaying Russian Empire produces significantly worse outcomes than being aligned with the West. Such news.
It's unfortunate that we don't have Belarusia here as well.
Of course, did not make it into Gravel Institute's video. Coincidentally, theirs would be the type of rhetoric you would use if you wanted to imply that aligning with the West doesn't make things better for the people. Also, look at these other countries that aren't aligned with the West that are doing better. Right. In the next section, Gravel Institute describes the roots of Ukrainian neo-Nazism like so.
And as quality of life collapsed, nationalism flourished. Some people turn to extremist politics.
Okay, I think Adam Something is being very uncharitable with the comparison. like he's right that the methodology is wrong and that you should be comparing to other Eastern European countries, but okay, maybe I'm being too charitable with the Gravel Institute, but I think it's clear that the Gravel Institute is just trying to compare Ukraine to countries that have suffered very, very much in recent years. Syria, Iraq, and what was the last one? North Korea. Those are countries that people in the US will know and will associate with poor quality of living, horrible dictatorships, and in general instability and war. So I think that's the comparison they were trying to establish, that somehow Ukraine's outcome outcome has ended up being worse than in those countries. Yeah, but the military conflicts in each of those countries is totally not the same, right? Like Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq is not remotely comparable to Ukraine. No, but I'm just saying that I think Adam Something is being a bit uncharitable with the comparison. To me, it's clear, as bad as the comparison is, and he's right to point out that it's bad methodology. The comparison is there to make an emotional association between look at those countries that we know are going have a poor outcomes for their people. Ukraine has an even worse outcome for their people, which I think is a fair parallel to try to make. To try to bring to mind to like Western people, look how it hasn't really gotten, it isn't really going very well. That being said, let's go back a bit. One thing that they are a bit disingenuous about. Interesting how the worst GDP per capita aligns. Well, this is not GDP per capita. This is in millions. This is just total GDP. What? What the fuck? This is not even the right title to the... This is not even the right title to give the fucking graph. What? This is not GDP per capita. This is... There's no way it's millions of dollars per capita. If it's millions of dollars per capita, we are looking at one of the richest countries and like the richest country in the world. Jesus Christ. Yeah, this is just total GDP, but if you go GDP per capita, in 1990 it was lower. It never went as low as when... Oh, God. Now, you know what surprised me? It surprised me that Adam Something missed that, actually. This is so bad. How did Adam Something miss that? Still think he's being uncharitable? Yes, look, the specific point I was making about the comparison, I still think so. Yeah, I don't know what that graph is, but Ukraine GDP is in billions. Yeah, what the fuck is this graph? Where did they get this? Yes, this is the graph. GDP constant international dollars. Constant 2017 international dollars. We found it! We made it! PPP is not GDP, Jesus. Yeah, everything's fucking wrong in the Gravel Institute graph is wrong. Like finding a graph that's the same shape doesn't justify the Gravel Institute graph. That's not how it works. But yes, we at least found the shape. I wasn't fact checking this video, and now I fucking regret it. This video is so bad.
Expectancy of Ukrainian men was lower than in Syria, Iraq, and North Korea.
First off, I'm glad Gravel Institute has such unwavering
we already saw this.
all-time high, even with an ongoing war inside the country, where lots of not a big graph. You might think since they are similar in terms of demographics.
Yeah, there's no way to spin this. Like the Gravel Institute is lying, exactly. They're doing some really fucked up math, which still is lying, or I don't know what they're doing. Yeah.
So on. Why bring up these random countries from different corners of the world? Why not Eastern European countries? Well, because if you put those on the graph, you get this. Countries that used to be in the Soviet
North Korea is nearly 70. What the fuck?
Very early.
Adam Something's remark about it's curious how charitable they are with trusting North Korea's data, and that's a fair remark. Okay, do you trust North Korean reporting as well? It's an open question.
And fully integrated into the West have much higher life expectancies than Ukraine or even Russia. And then some cynical person might come along and point out,
yeah, GDP per capita of Ukraine in 1990 was $1,570. In 2020, it's $3,727. Literally, like, what, 2.5 times the GDP in 90. Yeah. I don't get it.
Being aligned with the decaying Russian Empire produces significantly worse outcomes than being aligned with the West. Such nuance, of course, did not make it into Gravel Institute's video. Coincidentally, theirs would be the type of rhetoric you would use if you wanted to imply that aligning with the West doesn't make things better for the people. Also, look at these other countries that aren't aligned with the West that are doing better. Right. In the next section, Gravel Institute describes the roots of Ukrainian neo-Nazism like so.
Man, I feel so bad that I was charitable to the Gravel Institute video last week. God damn it. I fucking fell into the trap.
And as quality of life collapsed, nationalism flourished. Some people turned to extremist politics. And that was partly because Ukrainian nationalism, formed in opposition to the Soviet Union, tended to have a strongly right-wing flavor. To understand that, we have to look at a crucial figure in Ukrainian nationalist history, a guy named Stepan Bandera. You see, in the 1930s and 40s, Bandera wanted Ukrainian independence from Poland and the Soviet Union. So when the Nazis invaded, Bandera allied with them. His followers
What video? I don't remember you being charitable. No, I'm saying that... wait, are you memeing at me? Because last week I watched the... Oh yeah, sweeps under the rug. Okay, never mind.
Secured huge numbers of Poles and Jews. But in spite of this legacy, Bandera is still viewed as a hero in the west of Ukraine. There are Stepan Bandera streets, museums, and monuments. In 2010, Bandera was even named an official Hero of Ukraine.
So in their world, this Bandera guy did ethnic cleansing while collaborating with the Nazis as he sought Ukrainian independence, and he's revered to this day mostly in the west of the country, which is a rather far-right region. What Gravel Institute conveniently omitted is that the biggest resurgence of pro-Bandera sentiment happened after Russia invaded Ukraine. Sure, the far-right had a presence even before, and was also out to protest during the Maidan, obviously, but the real push for decommunization and the re-establishment of a Ukrainian national identity came after Crimea was stolen, and when the Ukrainian army was already fighting a war in the east against both Russian proxies and actual Russian soldiers. To go back to examples from the east, why do you think groups like ISIS, the Taliban or Al-Qaeda gained such prominence? Because a larger imperialist power invaded their lands, which galvanized their support and helped them rise to prominence. This is
something I've been thinking a lot in the recent days. Ever since I did my research for last Lib Praxis, whose topic was Indian nationalism, I remembered this thing that hey, welcome back, Fibewater. I remember this thing that I was taught when I was going to, when I was in high school concerning India. I was taught that Gandhi was a nationalist, which is a very, it just has had me thinking ever since then. Nationalism is, like, just like Adam Something is describing here, nationalism is a natural consequence and reaction when faced with imperialism, when faced with colonialism, when faced with the invasion of a bigger country. And it can take ugly forms. Just like he's comparing the rise of the Ukrainian far right to ISIS. That's not a very charitable comparison. I'm comparing it to how Gandhi's rhetoric was extremely nationalist, not in a negative way, but you can also make those kinds of charitable comparisons, or more charitable comparisons. Just to, like, point out, like, you can still, of course, criticize and you should criticize the far right elements in Ukraine or in other countries, but nationalism really is a natural reaction to foreign interference.
Extremism 101, which I'm sure Gravel Institute would agree with. Why then do they not extend this very simple concept to Ukraine? Because then it would be much harder to fearmonger about Ukrainian Nazis in service of the underlying goal, which is to pander to an audience that only wants to hear America bad. Oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself there. Moving on.
But Bandera is hated in the East, where Soviet identity was historically a lot stronger. And that East-West divide was a big fracture within Ukraine. In Western Ukraine, there was more stress on a specifically Ukrainian identity, closer to Europe. In Eastern Ukraine, meanwhile, people were more likely to stress their historic ties to Russia and the Russian language. Fast forward to 2000.
Okay, so Adam Something doesn't seem to want to say anything about this. My understanding is that this East-West divide is exaggerated in the Gravel Institute video. There's a bit more nuance to it. For example, Stepan Bandera is a controversial figure in the West as well. A lot of people in the West don't like the adulation of Stepan Bandera, and there are people in the East. There are a lot of people in the East who do like Stepan Bandera as well, who like what he represents for the Ukrainian national identity in the face of Russian hegemony. And like this goes back to what I was saying about nationalism being a natural reaction to an imperialist threat. Maybe I'm being maybe I will be too charitable with them, but I do want to grant also. I suspect that there are a lot of people in Ukraine who do like Stepan Bandera, who aren't necessarily neo-Nazis. You could just be someone who truly wants to uphold this idea of Ukrainian nationalism in the face of Russian imperialism. God, I'm gonna get canceled over my commentary on this video.
Fast forward to 2010, when Ukraine elected a relatively pro-Russian politician named Viktor Yanukovych as its president, with strong support from voters in the East. Yanukovych pursued a regionalist and Russia-friendly agenda, which angered people in the West.
So the East-West divide in Ukraine, the West is more pro-European, while the East is more pro-Russian, and the latter helped elect Viktor Yanukovych. None of this is false on the surface. However, calling Viktor Yanukovych a relatively pro-Russian politician is a way to de-emphasize Yanukovych's staunchly pro-Russian politics. And I noticed how Gravel Institute leaves out the inconvenient fact that Yanukovych imprisoned his pro-Western opponent, Yulia Tymoshenko, right after he got elected in 2010. Also that he stole the election in 2004, when Ukrainians needed the Orange Revolution to force a rerun, which Yanukovych then lost. And these instances of twisting information, using loaded language, and disingenuous presentation only get more numerous as the video goes on. Like,
fuck, I forgot about the Tymoshenko thing. Oh god, the next time a fucking Russian troll starts talking to me about the about how the like pro-Russian parties got banned right now during the war, yeah, because the pro-Russian parties are really democratic, you know, banning their political opponents.
This part right here.
And in 2013, Yanukovych announced that he was suspending discussions on Ukrainian integration with Europe. That decision sparked a protest movement centered in Kyiv called Euromaidan, after the Maidan Square where it took place.
In Kiev, thousands of Ukrainians continue to protest against the government's decision to hold off on signing a deal with the EU.
And I want you to consider this. Hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets, tens of thousands of flags and signs, and the three they show us are all Bandera related, with his portrait and the red and black flag. This was a conscious choice. They could have easily found footage of protesters from a massive crowd like this without Bandera related items, but instead they went out of their way to find footage that specifically contains far-right adjacent imagery. And they did this to lay some groundwork for the next section, which is what I would call a mask-off movement. Let's give it a watch.
In the West, Euromaidan was seen as a peaceful, pro-democracy movement, and most participants really were ordinary people who were angry at the government. But as the protests grew, encouraged by a harsh repression from the police and a brutal sniper attack that killed dozens of protesters and police alike, a new, more sinister element emerged and began to hijack the movement. The ultranationalists came on the scene.
It was often the nationalists who were the loudest and the most violent. A group calling itself the Right Sector is perhaps the largest. Its members can be seen marching around Kiev in columns of about a dozen.
Groups like the, quote, Right Sector, the ultranationalist Svoboda Party, originally called the Social National Party of Ukraine, try turning those words around, acted as a small but influential organized minority within the protests. And those extremists played an important role in exacerbating the protests by encouraging violence and more radical rhetoric. There are allegations that the sniper attack was actually orchestrated by the right sector and its co-conspirators.
Okay, so what have we just listened to? Here are the main claims. So the first point about protesters being ordinary people is correct. Point number 2 is a lie, however. And unfortunately for Gravel Institute, I recognized the footage they used. See, in preparation for my giant video essay about Ukraine, I saw a lot of videos about police violence during the Maidan protests. And I also came across the footage Gravel Institute is showing here. Or rather, the two versions of it. One shown by Western news outlets, and the other shown by Russia Today. Now, shortly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, RT was banned from YouTube, but thankfully I downloaded their video back then. It's the same footage as in Western media, with an important difference. They cut out the part where the police start running at protesters with guns and opening fire, and only show the part where protesters, some also armed, return fire at the police, who are then forced to retreat. Here's footage from Radio Svoboda in contrast, showing what actually happened, namely how it was the police charging at protesters and opening fire at them. And if we skip towards the end of the video, we arrive to the footage RT had shown, and through RT, the Gravel Institute. And I even screenshotted some indicative comments from under RT's video back then, which I ended up not using for my Ukraine video essay. They're being fired at with live ammo. What are they supposed to do? I am surprised no police officer has flipped yet and fired a full clip in a crowd. I see retreating policemen who attempt to save their motionless colleague, how was he injured, and fired in self-defense not at peaceful protesters, but an aggressive mob. They saved their lives. We can see that the peaceful protesters shooting at police and police escape. I am surprised, why have they waited so long? So these comments were under a video titled "Police Firing Live Ammo in Kiev Clashes." These are the opinions RT is trying to conjure up with their deceptively cut footage, which is the same thing Gravel Institute did here, as they talk about allegations that it was the far right that did the shooting, while showing you injured and retreating police officers, disingenuously cut from a video where police attacked first. The Gravel Institute is lying to you here by omission. And how about that article they show, claiming that the shooting was done not by police, but by the right sector and its co-conspirators? Here it is on thenation.com, titled "America's Collusion with Neo-Nazis," written by Stephen F. Cohen, published on the 2nd of May 2018. Here's the paragraph shown by the Gravel Institute. That the snipers who killed scores of protesters and policemen on Kiev's Maidan Square in February 2014, thereby triggering a quote-unquote democratic revolution that overthrew the elected president Viktor Yanukovych and brought to power a virulent anti-Russian pro-American regime, it was neither democratic nor a revolution, but a violent coup unfolding in the streets with high-level support, were not sent by Yanukovych, as is still widely reported, but instead, almost certainly, by the neo-fascist organization Right Sector and its co-conspirators. The sniper attack was almost certainly done by Ukrainian neo-fascists. Source? Trust me, bro. I'm Stephen F. Cohen, or was, who spent the last decade doing pro-Putin apologia and was a frequent guest on Russia Today. And I did find this article about him in the New York Magazine titled "The Pathetic Lives of Putin's American Dupes," written in 2014, around the time of Russia's annexation of Crimea. It tragically large number of left-wing Westerners in the 20th century deluded themselves about the horrors of Soviet communism. As awful and unforgivable as it was, the process by which they made themselves into dupes was at least explicable. They loved socialism, and one country in the world was implementing socialism, so they persuaded themselves, and for a while it was working. Today's Russia dupes are a smaller, more pathetic lot. Above all, they are just plain weirder, because they lack a clear ideological motive for their stoogery.
This is an interesting thing. Is that the myth, the absolute legend, Frank Baker? I think it is, yes. The myth, the legend. Anyways.
Above all, they are just plain weirder because they lack a clear ideological motive for their stoogery. Soviet Russia not only commanded a vast propaganda network, but embodied a doctrine with international appeal, and which had originated outside of Russia. Vladimir Putin's Russia follows no model except Russian nationalism. To the extent it employs a non-nationalist philosophy, its main idea is that gays have weakened Europe, and yet the dupes still come. The most prominent intellectual apologist for Putin is Stephen F. Cohen, Princeton professor, Russologist for the left-wing Nation. Cohen is a septuagenarian, old-school leftist who has carried on the mental habits of decades of anti-communism seamlessly into a new career of anti-Putinism. The Cohen method is to pick away at every indictment of the Russian regime without directly associating himself with its various atrocities. Is Putin persecuting gays? Well, Cohen wants you to know that various Ukrainian nationalists dislike gays too, and also Barack Obama's claim to snub Sochi because of gay rights is probably not on the level. Is Putin bullying and killing journalists? Says Cohen, every time a journalist breaks a leg, they say the Kremlin did it. Accidents happen. happen. So Stefan F. Cohen was your average Kremlin stooge with significant ties to Russian state propaganda, and he said that the Maidan shootings were almost certainly done by Ukrainian Nazis. The Gravel Institute doesn't mention Cohen's name or background in their video, they just throw out that screenshot and read out half a sentence. I suppose they really wanted to de-emphasize Cohen here. If they wanted to be unbiased, they could have said, Stefan Cohen, pro-Russian academic and frequent guest on RT, alleges that the sniper attacks were done by Ukrainian neo-fascists. But instead, we get a fleeting mention of a wild claim in an article without sources. And the problem with this is that there can be plenty of allegations made about everything. There are allegations that George Bush did 9/11, there are allegations about a ring of Democrat-linked satanic pedophile cabal operating out of a pizzeria in Washington, there are allegations about George Soros wanting to import brown people into Europe to commit white genocide, pick your favorite really. There are allegations is the rallying cry of conspiracy theorists, and the euphemism for I have no evidence. But to go back to the Gravel Institute's points, they even managed to contradict themselves. On one hand, the far-right people were hijacking the movement, meaning they were taking over. On the other hand, they were only a small but influential group with a dozen of them marching around at a time, and they merely helped exacerbate protests by encouraging violence and extreme rhetoric, meaning they weren't taking over, only they had a relatively outsized presence, and their saber-rattling inspired more violence here and there. So which is it then? Did they hijack the protests, or were they just a loud minority who said mean things and got into more scuffles? Why are you putting these mostly neutral statements in such a leading context, Gravel Institute, in a way that all tankies and pro-Putin lunatics can immediately infer what you're saying, while you can still claim plausible deniability?
By early 2014, the government lost the ability to control the protests.
In a rapidly evolving political crisis, President Yanukovych has been voted out by parliament, forced to leave Kiev.
And the US recognized interim government that replaced him had a significant far-right faction.
Is there more to the RT association besides Cohen appearing on RT? I don't know. There isn't like a source list down here on the research he did on Cohen, but Destiny was on RT. Contributing editor of The Nation magazine, founding of the American Committee for East-West Accord, American scholar of Russian studies. Putin era. In an article for The Nation, published in 2014, Cohen wrote that media malpractice had resulted in the relentless demonization of Putin, who is not an autocrat. He wrote that the American media's coverage of Russia was less objective, less balanced, more conformist, and scarcely less ideological than it had been during the Cold War. In a follow-up interview with Newsweek magazine, Cohen said Putin was the best potential partner we had anywhere in the world to pursue our national security. Etc., etc. Where's the, like, Russia Today stuff? You're right, I misremembered. It only says he appeared regularly on RT, which indeed is not the same as working regularly, working for RT. What a weaselly little liar, dude. Slams desk. My bad. I misremembered the clip. I thought he was saying that he was working for RT. No, he only works for The Nation, and he appears on RT. Adam Something has really bad arguments. Not necessarily. Most of it is guilt by association. You can disagree with the argument of Cohen appearing regularly on RT, but Cohen is still clearly pro-Putin. The Russian Nation? No, The Nation as in the magazine that this guy's working for. He's a contributing editor to The Nation magazine. Like, we are clearly looking at a pro-Putin journalist. Is being pro-Putin wrong? I mean, does it make you wrong? It definitely makes you very likely to spread misinformation. Yeah. You know, I'll fucking go there. Yes, it's wrong. I believe that liberal democracy is objectively better than an autocratic oligarchy. That's bad faith. How? In 2014, Cohen said that the crisis in Ukraine came about as a result of U.S. actions started by Bill Clinton and completed by George Bush to expand NATO's sphere of influence up to the borders of Russia in breach of a promise the U.S. made to Gorbachev when Germany was reunited. In relation to Russia's annexation of Crimea, he said that any Russian leader who has legitimacy at home would have had to do some version of what Putin is now doing. They would push back. In a June 30th, 2014 article in The Nation, Cohen said the U.S. was complicit in creating the crisis in Ukraine due to its support for the overthrow of President Viktor Yanukovych. He criticized the US political media establishment for being silent about Kyiv's atrocities in the Donbas region, which is heavily populated by Russian-speaking Ukrainians and ethnic Russians. He said there was considerable pressure from within Russian society for Putin to intervene militarily to protect Donbas, and that Putin had exercised remarkable restraint. You're not countering arguments with arguments, simply holding a position leads you to a conclusion. Putin became Putin because of Western belief in liberal democracy in Russia. I don't know what that means. I would argue Yeltsin it never was a liberal democracy. I feel this especially because I just got called a Russian shill, and boom, what an own. Okay, the quote about in the March 3rd, 2014 issue, saying Putin is not an autocrat, I think is dishonest. You can't, like, sure, say criticizing him for being saying he's pro-Putin, so he's wrong. I mean, he is advancing what's basically a conspiracy theory, or at least Adam Something describes it as a conspiracy theory. The identity of the shooters on the Maidan Plaza during the protests, I guess, open to debate, but the issue is it's extremely politicized. Why are those comments from Cohen? Yeah, this is a Cohen article. This is a Cohen article saying that the shooters were almost certainly the Ukrainian neo-Nazis. If you are shown that you're willing to intentionally lie to advance your political views, I think your opinions should be disregarded. Adam Something that said that was correct? No, Adam Something did not say it was correct. He said it wasn't. Those were allegations. Look, we can play this whole section again.
Kremlin stooge with significant ties to Russian state propaganda, and he said FNF.
What's this article too?
Cohen methods of main idea model motive for their stoogery.
The pathetic lives of Putin's American dupes. This seems to be the main article that Adam Something is using to inform his opinion of Cohen. The most prominent intellectual apologist for Putin is Stephen F. Cohen, a Russologist for the left-wing Nation. Cohen is a septuagenarian, old-school leftist who has carried on Is Putin persecuting gays? Well, Cohen wants us to know that various Ukraine nationalists dislike gays too. The degradation of mainstream American press coverage of Russia, a country still vital to U.S. national security, has been underway for many years. The recent tsunami of shamefully unprofessional and politically inflammatory articles in leading newspapers and magazines, particularly about the Sochi Olympics, Ukraine, and unfailingly President Vladimir Putin, is an indication this media malpractice is now pervasive and the new norm. The history of this degradation is also clear, blah, etc., etc. Oh yeah, this is the article that's quoted in the Wikipedia, for him, like, complain about the demonization of Putin. Russia today has some serious problems and many repugnant Kremlin policies, but anyone relying on mainstream American media will not find there any of their origins or influences in Yeltsin's Russia or in provocative US policies since the 1990s, only in the autocrat Putin, who, however authoritarian, in reality lacks such power. Nor is he credited with stabilizing a disintegrating nuclear-armed country, assisting US security pursuits from Afghanistan and Syria to Iran, or even with granting amnesty in December to more than 1,000 jailed prisoners, including mothers of young children. What a weird point. Not surprisingly, in January, the Wall Street Journal featured the widely discredited former president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, branding Putin's government as one of deceit, violence, and cynicism, with the Kremlin a nerve center of the troubles that bedeviled the West. But wanton Putin... Also, sure, no one was, like, celebrating Putin when the US and Russia were allied for Afghanistan and Syria. But yeah, if you're a normie, it's fucking normal. Yes, it's fucking normal to expect a higher burden of proof from someone who's shown that they are dishonest. Okay, the accusation in this article is that Cohen goes for whataboutism on Ukrainian nationalists, but I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen it yet in this article. The Sochi Games will soon pass, triumphantly or tragically, but the potentially fateful Ukrainian crisis will not. A new Cold War will divide. The divide between West and East may now be unfolding, not in Berlin, but in the heart of Russia's historical civilization. The result could be a permanent confrontation fraught with instability and threat of a hot war far worse than the one in Georgia in 2008, blah, 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 blah. In a January 21st blog post, Amy Knight, a regular contributor and inveterate Putin basher, warned the US government against cooperating with the Kremlin on Sochi security, even suggesting that Putin's secret services might have had an interest in allowing or even facilitating such attacks, as killed or wounded dozens of Russians in Volgograd in December. That's like hella conspiratorial. That's like a weird accusation. I'll actually agree with Cohen on that. That being said, I do buy into the. I don't remember the exact year the bombings happened, but I do buy into those bombings being like a false flag attack. I think my point is very simple. Make counter arguments to arguments. He appeared on RT and therefore bad is not a good argument. It's part of the argument. You're being dishonest. You're not being dishonest. You're being disingenuous here, Chow. It's by itself appearing on RT means nothing. Yes, appearing regularly on RT, but even appearing regularly on RT doesn't necessarily mean much. But it starts to perhaps paint a picture. But if you also spend all your time defending defending Russian interests in your journalism, and you also appear regularly on RT, then that paints a different picture.
Not only commanded a vast propaganda network, but embodied a doctrine with international appeal, and which had originated outside of Russia. Vladimir Putin's Russia follows no model except Russian nationalism. To the extent it employs a non-nationalist philosophy, its main idea is that gays have weakened Europe, and yet the dupes still come. The most prominent intellectual.
Doing it again, knowing it is disgusting? How did I do it again? I've been trying to flesh out an actual argument ever since you brought up that my original what I originally said was bad. I'm literally trying to bring it. You didn't address what I was just saying. I paraphrased Adam Something's argument as being based on, yes, if you individually take any single one of the things he brings up, they aren't relevant. But if you bring them all together, then they do paint a picture of someone who might be basically at this point functionally a propagandist.
Apologist for Putin is Stefan F.
Anyways, I actually want to double check though this source. Election fraud galvanizes Russian opposition. Communist Party 20 years after Soviet Union's collapse. Another article from Stephen Cohen. Allegations of widespread fraud in the recent elections that gave Prime Minister Vladimir Putin's United Russia Party a parliamentary majority have galvanized massive street protests in opposition to the Russian political establishment. This comes on the 20th anniversary of the breakup of the Soviet Union. The reason that the people who control the financial oligarchy in Russia don't want free elections is they know that if they had free elections to a parliament, the people would vote for candidates pledging to confiscate their property, which was privatized in the 1990s, says Stephen Cohen, professor of Russian studies at New York University. He notes, though these elections were not free and fair, they were the freest and fairest in 15 years, and that the members of the country's middle class make up the bulk of the protesters. Cohen also argues the American media has failed to report on the resurgence of the Communist Party, supported mainly by working-class voters in Russia's vast provinces, which could challenge Putin in the 2012 presidential race and force a runoff election. This is a transcript of the video, I guess. Oh, okay. They're talking with Stephen Cohen. Professor Cohen, talk about what's happening now in Russia. How significant are these mass protests? They're very significant, but the problem is that the significance is obscured and skewed by the American media narrative of it all. It's hard for me. I'm a professor by profession, and it startles me sometimes to realize that my students were born after the end of the Soviet Union, so I can't assume anything. But the information that we're getting about the print media, in particular in this country, the narrative is simply wrong. Here's a paradox. These parliamentary elections on December 4th for the first time brought out middle-class protesters. We don't know exactly how many, but tens of thousands in the center of Moscow. And yet, and please understand what I'm going to say, though these elections were not free and fair, they were the freest and fairest in 15 years. Why is he saying that? He's just claiming it without supporting it. There's a paradox there. What's the paradox? Well, the historical narrative of democracy in Russia is wrong. The basic line of the Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, where also mainstream television gets its stories, is that democratization began after the end of the Soviet Union, under Yeltsin in the 1990s, and Putin has been steadily crushing it, and this is the last attempt to crush it completely. My understanding is, I actually agree with Cohen. Saying that under Yeltsin, Russia was closer to democracy, does not seem true in hindsight. But that's just plain historically untrue. The high point of democracy in terms of both journalism, let's say, and elections was actually in 89, 90, and 91. And the reason that's not admissible is it took place in Soviet Russia under Gorbachev. In the 90s, under Yeltsin, began a process of what Russians called de-democratization. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's, like, Cohen's analysis here is on point. And Putin's just continuing that. If Adam Something's video was on how Stephen Cohen is a Russian stooge, everything that he said is making sense. His videos on debunking the points from the Gravel Institute. Have you been following the video? The Gravel Institute quotes Stephen Cohen to it quotes Stephen Cohen to allege that that the shooting on the Maidan Plaza was caused by by Ukrainian far-right extremists. It's quoting Stephen Cohen on that. So this is not about attacking Stephen Cohen. It's about attacking the source of the Gravel Institute's claim. And you just admitted that everything he said makes sense in showing that Stephen Cohen is a Russian stooge. If you concede that, then you concede that he's not necessarily a very reliable source for a highly contentious conspirationist claim, that the Gravel Institute is echoing without properly contextualizing it, which is what Adam Something is criticizing. Yet I agree with him. Yes, and what we were just reading now, what he was saying seemed very reasonable and in line with my understanding of Russian history. Yes, but I would not trust him if he starts making conspirationist. I don't know which word to use. If he starts claiming conspiracies, like the idea that the shooting was a far right, like, false flag attack, conspiratorial. Thank you. Yes, conspiratorial. That's the right word. For the conspiratorial claims, I would take into account that he is being clearly a Russian stooge. That is an absolutely fair argument to make. Like, once again, the context is look at what the Gravel Institute. This clip. This is from the Gravel Institute video. The Gravel Institute is out. Like, okay, I'm playing it everything. I'm going back. Okay, I'm going back. I'm playing again the entire part where he takes down where he takes this down.
Are the main claims. So their first point about protesters being ordinary people is correct. Point number 2 is a lie, however, and unfortunately for Gravel Institute, I recognized the footage they used. See, in preparation for my giant video essay about Ukraine, I saw a lot of videos about police violence during the Maidan protests, and I also came across the footage Gravel Institute is showing here, or rather, the two versions of it. One shown by Western news outlets, and the other shown by Russia Today. Now, shortly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, RT was banned from YouTube, but thankfully I downloaded their video back then. It's the same footage as in Western media, with an important difference. They cut out the part where the police start running at protesters with guns and opening fire, and only show the part where protesters, some also armed, return fire at the police, who are then forced to retreat. Here's footage from Radio Svoboda in contrast, showing what actually happened, namely how it was the police charging at protesters and opening fire at them. And if we skip towards the end of the video, we arrive to the footage RT had shown, and through RT, the Gravel Institute. And I even screenshotted some indicative comments from under RT's video back then, which I ended up not using for my Ukraine video essay. They're being fired at with live ammo. What are they supposed to do? I am surprised no police officer has flipped yet.
So this is the first part that, so this is the first thing. So Adam Something is attacking this part of the Gravel Institute video, which quotes a Stephen Cohen article and shows this clip. First he attacks the clip as being disinformation because the clip doesn't show the full context of the shooting where the police shot first at the protesters and then were shot back at.
And fired.
And so the Gravel Institute chose to only show the clip where you see the police being shot at and retreating, which I think Adam Something is correct in saying that is disinformation to show that part without the context of the police shooting first at the protesters. And then we can skip ahead. He like just to illustrate the fact that it's disinformation, he shows how people are disinformed by seeing the clip out of context. through the comments, and then he goes back to the actual article.
Cut footage, which is the same thing Gravel Institute did here, as they talk about allegations that it was the far right that did the shooting, while showing you injured and retreating police officers.
Once again, this is a Stephen Cohen article. This is why we're talking about Stephen Cohen, because the Gravel Institute quotes Stephen Cohen saying it's instead almost certainly, the shooting is instead almost certainly by the neo-fascist organization Right Sector and its co-conspirators.
Disingenuously cut from a video where police attacked first. The Gravel Institute is lying to you here by omission. And how about that article they show, claiming that the shooting was done not by police, but by the Right Sector and its co-conspirators? Here it is on thenation.com, titled America's Collusion with Neo-Nazis, written by Stephen F. Cohen, published on the 2nd of May 2018. Here's the paragraph shown by the Gravel Institute. That the snipers who killed scores of protesters and policemen on Kiev's Maidan Square in February 2014, thereby triggering a quote-unquote democratic revolution that overthrew the elected president Viktor Yanukovych and brought to power a
my understanding, well, we can double check. My understanding is that the Gravel Institute chose to put the video together with the Cohen article. But let's find it. America's collusion with neo-Nazis. Yeah, this is just a text article. No, that was Gravel Institute's choice to put the video together with the article.
Published on the 2nd of May 2018. Here's the paragraph shown by the Gravel Institute. That the snipers who killed scores of protesters and policemen on Kiev's Maidan Square in February 2014, thereby triggering a quote-unquote democratic revolution that overthrew the elected president Viktor Yanukovych and brought to power a virulent anti-Russian pro-American regime, it was neither democratic nor a revolution, but a violent coup unfolding in the streets with high-level support, were not sent by Yanukovych, as is still widely reported, but instead, almost certainly, by the neo-fascist organization Right Sector and its co-conspirators. The sniper attack was almost certainly done by Ukrainian neo-fascists. Source? Trust me, bro. I'm Stephen F. Cohen, or was, who spent the last decade doing pro-Putin apologia and was a frequent guest on Russia Today. And I did find this article about him in the New York Magazine titled The Pathetic Lives of Putin's American Dupes, written in 2014 around the
So yes, this is character assassination, but because the Gravel, Stephen Cohen and the Gravel Institute, by quoting Stephen Cohen, which is why we're talking about him, are literally asking us to trust him, to trust his word on the odds that the shooting was orchestrated by the far right, the Right Sector. The fact that Cohen could be referring to something else and not necessarily that clip, sure. And once again, now that in the second part of this criticism, Adam Something is only addressing the article. He's not addressing the clip. He addresses them separately. I don't think your rebuttal, Chow, is relevant. Lack of proof does not imply lack of existence. Yes. But extraordinary claims do require some proof, especially when, once again, this Adam Something, I think, makes a good effort at showing that that Stephen Cohen is not unbiased on this topic. Stephen Cohen, in fact, seems to have some sympathies for a certain angle on this topic. Of course, so Adam just uses character assassination instead. Bias does not make you wrong. That's... I don't know what? Yeah, not just unbiased. We have already established he's willing to openly lie. That's fair as well. Bias does not make you wrong. Bias literally clouds your judgment. That is just a wrong statement, Chow. I feel like you're being combative about this just on principle. Being biased does not imply that you're wrong. Yes, in pure logic, being biased does not imply that you're wrong. It implies that you're untrustworthy and that any statements that you make should be looked at with extreme skepticism. And that is what Adam Something wants us to do. He wants us to be skeptical of an extraordinary claim made by Stephen Cohen. And he does a pretty good job of it.
Time of Russia's annexation of Crimea. A tragically large number of left-wing Westerners in the 20th century deluded themselves about the horrors of Soviet communism. As awful and unforgivable as it was, the process by which they made themselves into dupes was at least explicable. They loved socialism, and one country in the world was implementing socialism, so they persuaded themselves, and for a while it was working. Today's Russia dupes are a smaller, more pathetic lot. Above all, they are just plain weirder, because they lack a clear ideological motive for their stoogery. Soviet Russia not only commanded a vast propaganda network, but embodied a doctrine with international appeal, and which had originated outside of Russia. Vladimir Putin's Russia follows no model except Russian nationalism. To the extent it employs a non-nationalist philosophy, its main idea is that gays have weakened Europe, and yet the dupes still come. The most prominent intellectual apologist for Putin is Stephen F. Cohen, Princeton professor, Russologist for the left-wing Nation. Cohen is a septuagenarian, old-school leftist who has carried on the mental habits of decades of anti-communism seamlessly into a new career of anti-Putinism. The Cohen method is to pick away at every indictment of the Russian regime without directly associating himself with its various atrocities. Is Putin persecuting gays? Well, Cohen wants you to know that various Ukrainian nationalists dislike gays too, and also Barack Obama's claim to snub Sochi because of gay rights is probably not on the level. Is Putin bullying and killing journalists? Says Cohen, every time a journalist breaks a leg, they say the Kremlin did it. Accidents happen. So Stephen F. Cohen was your average Kremlin stooge with significant ties to Russian state propaganda, and he said that the Maidan shootings were almost certainly done by Ukrainian Nazis. The Gravel Institute doesn't mention Cohen's name or background in their video, they just throw out that screenshot and read out half a sentence. I suppose they really wanted to de-emphasize Cohen here. If they wanted to be unbiased, they could have said, Stephen Cohen, pro-Russian academic and frequent guest on RT, alleges that the sniper attacks were done by Ukrainian neo-fascists. But instead,
This is all that, like, Adam Summey is not even saying that the claim shouldn't be portrayed. He's just claiming that the claim that the shooting was perpetrated by Ukrainian neo-Nazis is badly contextualized.
we get a fleeting mention of a wild claim in an article without sources. And the problem with this is that there can be plenty of allegations made about everything. There are allegations that George Bush did 9/11, there are allegations about a ring of Democrat-linked satanic pedophile cabal operating out of a pizzeria in Washington, there are allegations about George Soros wanting to import brown people into Europe to commit white genocide. Pick your favorite, really. There are allegations is the rallying cry of conspiracy theorists, and the euphemism for I have no evidence. But
badly contextualized as to the sources, which is his angle. Adam is critical of no context to the claim, but context to the source. The claim itself is contentious. I don't know. I'm not like it would take a lot of time to look into the fucking like conspiracies around this. That's what should have been said. No proof on either side. Wait, Chow, do you realize that the fucking Gravel Institute video and Stephen Cohen are saying almost certainly about a contentious claim? Okay, you fucking hate that he's attacking Stephen Cohen's character for what do you want him to do? Do you want him to make a fucking 5-hour video exploring the conspiracy theories around this? Or I guess just show that it's contentious and move on? I don't know, I think you're being really uncharitable with Adam Something on this, and I don't understand the reason.
to go back to the Gravel Institute's points, they even managed to contradict themselves. On one hand, the far-right people were hijacking the movement, meaning they were taking over. On the other hand, they were only a small but influential group with a dozen of them marching around at a time, and they merely helped exacerbate protests by encouraging violence and extreme rhetoric, meaning they weren't taking over, only they had a relatively outsized presence, and their saber-rattling inspired more violence here and there. So which is it then? Did they hijack the protests, or were they just a loud minority who said mean things and got into more scuffles? Why are you putting these mostly neutral statements in such a leading context, Gravel Institute, in a way that all tankies and pro-Putin lunatics can immediately infer what you're saying, while you can still claim plausible deniability?
By early 2014, the government lost the ability to control the protests.
Yeah, I'm sipping that furry goodness.
In a rapidly evolving political crisis, President Yanukovych has been voted out by parliament, forced to leave Kiev.
And the US recognized interim government that replaced him had a significant far-right faction.
Well, Adam is doing a really bad argument here, walking around in groups of dozens. I'm the... Oh, that the quote was walking around in groups of dozens and is now just a dozen people. When was the claim in the video? Alright, let me just remember. Okay, we're at 22 minutes 30.
Way to find footage that specifically I would call
people who were angry at the government. But as the protests grew, encouraged by a harsh repression from the police and a brutal sniper attack that killed dozens of protesters and police alike, a new, more sinister element emerged and began to hijack the movement. The ultranationalists came on the scene.
It was often the nationalists who were the loudest and the most violent. A group calling itself the Right Sector is perhaps the largest. Its members can be seen marching around Kiev in columns of about a dozen.
Groups like the, quote, Right Sector, the ultranationalists
in columns of about a dozen, and they're...
is correct. Point number 2 is a lie, however, and unfortunately for Rebel Institute, I recognized the footage they used. See, in and frequent guest on RT alleges that the sniper attacks just a loud minority who said mean things and got into more. Allegations is the rallying cry of conspiracy theorists and the euphemism for I have no evidence. But people were hijacking the movement, meaning they were taking over. On the other hand, they were only a small but influential group with a dozen of them marching around at a time, and they merely helped exacerbate protests by encouraging violence.
That's true, yeah. Adam something is being disingenuous with this argument. I mean, he could still make the same argument without misquoting the earlier argument as well. He can still. I think there's still a point to be made about the language here. When you're talking about hijacking a movement, it is implied that the leadership of the movement is taken over. Is taken over, and the only... But yeah, the earlier quote in the Gravel Institute video is just about columns of dozens moving around in the protest. It's not about... There's no claim done as to how many right sector activists are there. So I actually I have to agree with you on this one, Turnit. This is a bad argument, yeah. This actually is a bad argument.
Mostly neutral statements in such a what you're saying.
The government lost the ability to control the protests.
Crisis Kiev.
Significant far-right faction. The Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Defense, and others were all from that far-right party, Svoboda.
So the interim government had...
What is a bad argument? I wasn't really paying attention. He misquotes the earlier claim in the Gravel Institute video. In the Gravel Institute video, there was like a clip where they quoted a description of the right sector activism in the Maidan protests, saying that columns of dozens of the right sector like activists were moving around in columns, or I don't want to say activists, let's call them what they are. The neo-Nazis were moving around in columns of dozens of people, and then Adam something claims that they were saying that there are only dozens of right sector people in the protests, which are like those are completely different claims. I assume Adam something like. Either he's being really dishonest about his argument, or he like forgot to proofread his script, because that's really bad. He can't you can't misunderstand a claim that they move around in groups of dozens as there are only a couple dozens of them in the protest. That just doesn't work. And he's claiming it as a contradiction in the Gravel Institute video, which it isn't there. It could be interesting if he brings up proof that there were not that many neo-Nazis in the protests. If he had some proof or arguments for that would support his argument. But he's just like completely wrong in what he says there. Yeah.
A significant far-right faction, and 4 ministers came from the far-right Svoboda party. This is true, however, Gravel
there might only be 36 Nazis at the rally, but they move in columns, so it isn't a lie. That's it, basically. No, you misunderstand what I'm trying to say. The Gravel Institute said that when they are in the protests, they move in columns of like a dozen, and Adam Something then repeats the claim wrongly, saying that there's only a couple dozens in the protest. There could be like 500 of them, but moving around in columns. Or there could be just like a couple dozens. The Gravel Institute video actually doesn't say anything about how many there are, about how many right sector neo-Nazis there were in the protests, and Adam Something is misquoting the claim, saying that there's alleging that there were claiming how many there were in the protest. I wonder what his credentials are, but it's really off-putting when a lot of people see him as an authority by default. When I read his stuff, I get really bad vibes. I earlier had the problem with his average life expectancy argument as well, and it was just after he missed the easiest dunk in the world on the GDP graph too. Like the GDP graph is so fucked up, and then he nitpicks on the life expectancy graph, even though you can be like really fucking because he doesn't say anything about the GDP graph, by the way. He doesn't say anything. He didn't fact check it. But then he nitpicks on the life expectancy graph, even though it's very clear to me that the Gravel Institute is just comparing Ukrainian life expectancy to Syrian life expectancy, simply because people know that Syria is like a fucked up country, and he just wants to show, hey, life expectancy is even worse in Ukraine. That's like all the Gravel Institute was saying, and he portrays it as like some weird convoluted thing.
Institute is conveniently leaving out a number of relevant things here. The 4 people on the picture are Alexander Sich, Igor Tenyuk, Andriy Mokhnik, and Ihor Shvaika, and there are a couple of things to mention here. First, as Gravel Institute says, they were only part of the interim government. That means they were all gone by the 12th of November 2014, except for Ihor Tenyuk, who left much earlier, having spent a grand total of 26 days in his position. Also, Alexander Sich was one of 3 deputy prime ministers, with the other 2 not being from Svoboda. Second, none of these people were succeeded by other Svoboda politicians. Third, on the elections in October 2014, the Svoboda party had lost 31 seats out of their original 37, having gotten only 4.71% of the national vote. The right sector also ran and won a single seat with 1.8% of...
Yeah, so this is something we fact-checked during when we actually were watching the Gravel Institute video. We double-checked this. Yeah, like the Svoboda and right sector had like lost all their fucking seats. They're irrelevant politically in the grand scheme of things. They like literally, if you just look at those stats, fucking France is like 5 times as Nazi as Ukraine. Looking at those stats, obviously that's not a very correct comparison, but just to put things in perspective, like the far right parties in France, they're gaining like 20 to 30%. We're looking at like so we can sum them up together. We're looking at 6.5%. The thing about those members being interim members is really interesting. Not rhetorical. Do you know why they got the seats in the first place? No, I don't know what the process was for building the interim government. That's something I would genuinely be curious to read about, actually, on how not even because not even out of like having any specific issues. It's just the question of how you build an interim government is like a really interesting one, because you cannot run like elections and stuff, but you still need someone to sit in the seat in the meantime, right? Also, Soap, I'll check your I'll check your link after, okay? I want to focus on the video for now.
the national vote. So if Gravel Institute wanted to be honest here, they could have said something like this. The far-right had a presence within the interim government, having achieved 4 ministerial positions from March till November 2014, except for a defense minister who was removed after less than a month. They weren't succeeded by other far-right politicians, however, and Svoboda lost the majority of its seats during the October election, while the right sector only won a single seat. It doesn't sound so scary or dramatic when you put it that way, does it? But once again, the goal of Gravel Institute here is not to tell you what happened, but to push a specific pro-Russian narrative. In their world, the interim government was full of Nazis,
and this led to backlash in the East.
Yeah, this I think is a super fair criticism from Adam Something, insisting. And we had this, Chinchilla, you were here when I was watching the Gravel Institute video. We had this argument, like we did look up the seats in parliament and saw that they were like politically irrelevant, but we didn't think to look up the actual terms of the length of the terms of those far-right politicians. They actually didn't hold power in Ukraine, and the Gravel Institute portraying it this way is disingenuous.
Because Eastern Ukrainians were horrified at what they saw.
And to be fair, it's you can still make an argument about the influence of those Nazi parties in Ukraine just based off the fact that they were part of the interim government. In fact, it would support the idea that the protests, that they were very influential, or that they became influential in the protests, since you would assume that the parties that are influential in the protests were those that scored seats in the interim government. Like, they could have gone for similar arguments, but sticks to the not misrepresented the facts, which is kind of strange on the Gravel Institute's part.
As a far-right seizure of power, with veneration of Bandera and elimination of equal recognition for languages like Russian.
Service industry workers have since January been obliged to talk to customers in Ukrainian unless clients specifically ask to switch.
If I work, pay my employees' salaries and my taxes, it's none of your bloody business which language I do it in.
They're saying East Ukraine had a backlash too, which is true. Okay, this stuff about the I doubt Adam Sony has something to say about this. This stuff about the attacking the Russian language is true, yeah, and like Russian culture. I actually was thinking about it because there's precedent in French history for this. France actually did something very similar, where France destroyed and attacked the regional identities. You would get punished in school, for example. They put in place some really fucked up systems where if you were a kid in like a regional school in France and you were talking in the regional dialect, you would get punished. You were supposed to only talk in French, and that's how basically France had ended up killing the regional dialects. No, they're saying Eastern Ukraine had a backlash to Svoboda people in the government. And Adam says, yeah, but only 20 days, blah blah, which is irrelevant. Okay, let's go for the nuance between the two takes. Saying that they weren't able to stay in government because there was a backlash from people from Ukrainians is absolutely fair to point out. That still goes to show that still doesn't change the fact that they didn't stay in government, and that the Gravel Institute, the Gravel Institute video is presenting them as if they had power long term. No, in caps lock.
And here I want to briefly consider manipulation through word choice. The US recognized interim government was full of far-right people, the Easterners were horrified at what they saw was a far-right seizure of power, the elimination of Russian as an equal language, the use of emotional, loaded language serves to feed into the overarching narrative that the evil US is funding evil Ukrainian Nazis, and the poor, Russian-speaking Ukrainians are very scared. Funny enough, this rhetorical trick is once again familiar to me from channels like PragerU.
This is the reality that police commanders in urban areas face every day. And every day they get calls from law-abiding citizens.
You're taking my argument badly. I can't argue in chat. Okay, I'll hop in Discord. You wanna... Did you want to... Can I call you? My God, we jumped to PragerU. No, okay, Chow, you missed the beginning of the video. It's because the Gravel Institute presents itself... no, I don't want to argue. Oh, no argument. Just come on and explain your argument, okay? I don't... it's not about debating. I just want to... I just want to, like, hear the explanation. Hold up. The deputy PM and 3 government ministers were actual damn Nazis, and there may well have been a backlash to that in the East, to be frank. Even if they then lost their seats, that doesn't make the claim disingenuous. No, I just said that doesn't make the claim disingenuous, but hiding the fact that they only stayed in power for a couple months is disingenuous. I'm not saying the claim is disingenuous. I'm saying that not mentioning that they were only in power for a couple months is disingenuous. And Adam Something is right to point that out. But it's still correct to point out that la baguette mandatoire. It's still correct to point out that literal Nazis got into power. Yes, and that's what I was saying earlier. In reaction to the Adam Something's point, the Gravel Institute doesn't even need to hide the fact that they're only in power for a couple months to push their argument. The fact that Nazis got into power is grave enough. You don't have to be disingenuous about how long they stayed in power to push your narrative or to push your point. I was actually arguing in favor of the Gravel Institute, except that they, or rather in favor, not in favor of them. I think it's fucked up that they hid that part of how long they stayed in power. But I'm saying I don't understand why they hid it when they can still make basically the same points without hiding it. Anyways, Tyrann, okay, they're saying Eastern Ukraine had a backlash to Svoboda people in the government. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what you're saying. Just a quick your mom dunk.
In high crime neighborhoods begging for assistance.
Gravel Institute also doesn't mention that Russia tends to actively use the Russian language as a geopolitical weapon. Russian speakers to Russia is like oil to America. If you have too much of it, sooner or later their army shows up on your borders to liberate your country. Also, I love how they put the story of the service workers next to the Svoboda image. The government was usurped by evil anti-Russian Nazis, it is implied, who have instituted the draconian measure of service workers in Ukraine having to engage customers in Ukrainian unless the customer asks for Russian, in which case it's fine.
Okay. In the end, Russia is using the fact that there are Russian speakers as like a geopolitical argument for invasion. That being said, saying this about
Also, I love how they put the story of the service workers next to the Svoboda.
Also, in high crime neighborhoods,
there's something that really bothered me in what Adam Something just said.
Begging for assistance.
Gravel Institute also doesn't mention that Russia tends to actively use the Russian language as a geopolitical weapon. Russian speakers to Russia is like oil to America. If you have too much of it, sooner or later their army shows up on your borders to liberate your country. Also, I love how they put the story of the service workers next.
Unfortunately, that is what happened. It's incomplete just as Adam made actual errors himself, not saying everything that happened in a brief summary video could be willfully disingenuous, or it might not be, to be fair. I am willing to be charitable with the Gravel Institute. I was charitable on the like life expectancy stuff earlier, honestly. I was charitable on the life expectancy stuff. I'm not willing to be charitable on how long those politicians were in power. No, I don't think like even if it's an honest mistake, it's a really bad mistake to make in how you're portraying the situation. It's like bad enough that I don't want to be charitable about it. But yes, you can make honest mistakes, of course.
To the Svoboda image.
And we did point, and you're right, we like Adam Something made mistakes in this video as well.
The government was usurped by evil anti-Russian Nazis, it is implied, who have instituted the draconian measure of service workers in Ukraine having to engage customers in Ukrainian unless the customer asks for Russian, in which case it's fine. Okay, but in the next segment they go even further, in the form of trivializing actual Russian imperialism through euphemisms.
Anti-government protests broke out across the east. In the eastern peninsula of Crimea, people were furious. Many of them talked about joining Russia, so the Russian government saw an opportunity. They wanted to encourage a surge of Russian nationalism for its own benefit. So Russia annexed Crimea and held a disputed referendum to legitimize the decision.
The Russian government wanted to encourage a surge of Russian nationalism for their own.
Like, this happened and there was a backlash to that thing that happened. It's a story of events, incomplete but not disingenuous. Look, you can lie by omission. It is still a lie. I think you're being a little bit too charitable with this specific part of the Gravel Institute video.
Benefit, so Russia annexed Crimea and held a disputed referendum to legitimize the decision. And isn't that amazing? At least they used the word annexed there, so it's only 99% reprehensible. But hey, if that's the game we're playing, let's roll. Nazi Germany wanted to encourage a surge of German nationalism for their own benefit, so they annexed the Sudetenland and held a disputed referendum to legitimize the decision. I'm surprised the Gravel Institute would try to trivialize Russian imperialism so openly. It's almost like they and their audience only have a problem with imperialism when it's the US doing it. Almost.
As many as 95.5% of the electorate in Crimea have voted to join Russia. We are going back home. Crimea is in Russia.
By the way, this 95.5% result is bullshit. We know this because, as I mentioned in my original Ukraine video, a Russian state agency accidentally posted the real results. According to them, the real result was about 50 to 60% voting for joining Russia, with a turnout of about 40%, in a referendum under Russian military occupation, where the two choices were yes and yes but later, and where the choice of remaining part of Ukraine was not on the ballot. The Gravel Institute doesn't mention any of these details. Instead, they take all these lies, falsifications and fraud committed by Russia and stuff it neatly under the phrase disputed referendum.
Energized by the annexation and supported by Russian armed and military personnel.
Yeah. I'll side with Gravel Institute on this one. I don't think saying a referendum is disputed is putting all the issues with the referendum under the like shoving them under the rug. It, like, what other language would you use without going into detail about the issues of the referendum? Which, sure, maybe you could argue that they should have made time in their video to go into detail about the issues with the referendum, but without going into detail, that's literally how you describe a referendum with problems, a disputed referendum. A referendum was held, but it was disputed because there were problems with it. I don't understand what Adam Something's problem is with that one. Imagine not thinking Crimea wanted to be Russian. I don't know, man. Like we did go over the 91 referendum, the 94 referendum, and the polling in the 2000s. But all of that stuff was about autonomy and not about being annexed. Like even the 91 referendum was about becoming an autonomous SSR. But regardless, yeah, I'm invading a country and holding a referendum for it is just bad. Yeah, it's not proper. That's not the proper way to do things. Yeah, the disputed probably referring to how the international community views it. The report does show that the referendum was rigged as hell. Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. When I hear someone talk about a disputed referendum, my first thought is not, oh wow, this referendum seems legit, which seems to be like my first thought is, huh, that referendum seems sus if it was disputed. And Adam Something is complaining that the Gravel Institute is portraying the referendum as legit. I don't get it. I don't. That's not the impression I get from the Gravel Institute portrayal. Like they're kind of glossing over the annexation. I think there is more of a legitimate criticism to be done there against the Gravel Institute, that they're glossing over the annexation of a part of another country. But the referendum itself, they're not portraying it as legitimate.
The anti-government protests became a full-blown secessionist movement. Eastern provinces like Donetsk and Luhansk held separatist referendums and declared independence. The new government branded these rebellions as, quote, terrorist actions. Ukraine entered a civil war, which was also a proxy war with Russia.
Okay, so anti-government protests became secession movements after they were energized by the annexation of Crimea and were supported by the Russian military. I'm glad they admit that at least. Then Donetsk and Luhansk held referendums, declared independence, and the new Ukrainian government declared these quote-unquote terrorist actions. And so, two things. Number one, you don't need to put terrorist actions into quotation marks. What they did was by definition terrorist action, whether or not you consider it moral.
Yeah, this is a fair argument. Secession is by definition like terrorism until you win, and then you legitimize it as like secession. But until you've won, it's called terrorism. I don't know. That's like one of those perspective things. But anyways.
Two, and this is very much a recurring theme now, Gravel Institute left out an important detail. Namely that at the time of the independence referendums, the war in Donbass had already been going on for at least a month. Meanwhile, Gravel Institute makes it sound like the war happened after the referendums. So no wonder the Ukrainian government brands these as terrorist actions.
Is that true? Donbass referendum date. May 11th, the Donbass status referendums, and the Donbass war starting date. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. That's a big L on the Gravel Institute side. Yeah, Adam Something is correct. The way the Gravel Institute portrayed it seemed much more like a logical progression. Basically the way the Gravel Institute portrayed it legitimized the war in Donbass much more than what the facts do.
They were fighting a war with them at that point. Now you might think I'm picking at minor points here, but consider the overall picture they're painting. If someone unfamiliar with recent Ukrainian history watches this, what narrative have they been given so far? Ukraine collapsed in the 90s and became a shithole country. This caused a far-right resurgence in the West, and the pro-Russian people in the East were afraid of this. The far-right hijacked the protests against the somewhat pro-Russian president and murdered dozens of protesters. After people chased away the president, the new government had a significant neo-Nazi presence. People in the East were afraid of this, so after Russia took Crimea, they declared independence, which began a civil war with the Ukrainian government branding them as terrorists. And would you look at that, we have arrived at official Russian state propaganda. This is the narrative Russia today tries to sell people in the West. And even though Gravel Institute does say that the Russian military is involved, they present this in a context that makes their involvement arguably justified. You know, Russia might have involved its military in Ukraine, but they're supporting Russian-speaking people who were horrified at what they saw as a far-right seizure of power, so of course the Russians would help them militarily. This is apologia. It's also a lie, as we've discussed.
But after decades of austerity and corruption, the Ukrainian army was totally unable to fight. So a lot of the action fell instead to the people who were the most violent, the ultranationalists. So a new paramilitary emerged. It was called the Azov Battalion. And unlike the official Ukrainian military, Azov's volunteers were willing to go the distance. But Azov wasn't just any random organization. It was a pretty disturbing far-right group. It had come out of neo-Nazi street gangs that had been used as muscle by Ukrainian elites in the 90s and 2000s. Azov members regularly sported tattoos of swastikas. Their symbol was based on a Nazi emblem. Their leader declared that their mission was to, quote, lead the white races of the world in a final crusade against the Semite-led Untermenschen, subhumans. But Azov's neo-Nazism turned out not to be such a huge concern to the Ukrainian government. Because in 2014, a guy named Arsen Avakov became interior minister in charge of police and security. And Avakov had been a longtime patron of the neo-Nazi gangs. And when he was a regional governor, he used them as enforcers. So when he became interior minister, Avakov had the Azov battalion incorporated into Ukraine's National Guard.
So the Ukrainian military was in shambles as a war was going on in the east, fueled by Russia. In response, the Ukrainian government turned to the ultranationalists to help beat back the enemy. Then the Minister of Interior made the Azov battalion officially part of the National Guard. And my question here is, what else was the Ukrainian government was supposed to do? The country was falling apart, the separatists were spreading westward, their military was in shambles, and among the few forces you did have, you didn't know who's going to betray you for Russia. Then comes a group of highly motivated ultranationalists with weapons training, whose entire worldview is predicated on fighting Russian invaders and whose allegiance is unquestionably with Ukraine. And they tell you, give us weapons and support and we'll get shit done. What decision maker would say no to that? Even if you hate the far-righters, wouldn't sending them to war mean many of them would die? That would be a win-win, right? You help halt the Russian offensives and you end up with less ultranationalists in the end. And the reason why they got integrated into the National Guard is because they did get the job done. They were effective, had high morale, and could be trusted to not switch sides. At the end
yeah, I don't like this argument from Adam Something. Arming and giving combat experience to far-right neo-Nazi nationalists is an extremely dangerous game. Them claiming that they'll die and it's a win-win is ridiculous. You're literally arming them and giving them combat experience that they can then turn around and use against you. There is a legitimate fear in you, or there was. Who knows what's going to happen after the war with Russia at this point? But there was a legitimate fear. There was a legitimate fear in Ukraine from 2014 to, well, until recently, that the arming and experience gained by the far right like paramilitary groups was going to threaten the Ukrainian democracy, that they were going to be able to directly threaten people, directly threaten the government, perhaps even stage a military coup. So I think Adam's argument here is really bad. Yeah. It's in fact it's ridiculous. Like how Destiny supported smaller streamers to take them down, who then took him down, you mean?
At the end of the day, the Azov battalion's rise to prominence could have been avoided if Russia didn't invade Ukraine in 2014 and 2022. It seems like this would be the quick and easy solution to Ukraine's supposed Nazi problem. If we can agree that groups like ISIS or the Taliban rose to prominence due to Western meddling, why can't we then say that groups like Azov did so due to Russian meddling? Gravel Institute spends the next section of their video describing how US military system...
Okay, this is an argument Adam was making earlier, which I do think is fair. Invasion, imperialism, or colonialism have always led to a rise in nationalist, like a reactionary rise in nationalist sentiment. That being said, one thing that there is a big problem with how he phrased this argument here, comparing it to, it's like speaking of ISIS. ISIS has roots in the extreme Islamist organizations that themselves have roots in the insurgencies that had been supported, financed, armed, and trained by the US during the Cold War. I'm pretty sure there are direct links from one to the other. Like Al-Qaeda was the Taliban, were the Mujahideen, and Al-Qaeda became ISIS at some point. Or at least members became members of ISIS. I might be wrong on this though. But that's so this in fact, him bringing up ISIS, I think is actually kind of an L when it comes to the argument he just made of it being not dangerous to arm and support neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine. He literally then quotes the worst possible outcome of the enemy of my enemy is my friend policy when it comes to arming like crazy people. That being said, yeah, like when you're under threat by a foreign power, it's very often it will lead to a rise in nationalist sentiment. That fundamental argument is still is true, even though he's like portraying it really wrongly. ISIS and Al Qaeda are two separate groups that just have similar goals. I thought there were direct like paternity lines between them, but I would have to research that actually. Yeah. Iquedo.
This ended up in the hands of Azov fighters, once again in somewhat of a contrast with the original title of the video, which suggests a direct
they work together,
and deliberate
but one did not
the
form the other. Okay, fair enough.
US's part. Or does it? Turns out, as I was making this video, they changed the title from How America Funded Ukraine's Neo-Nazis to America, Russia and Ukraine's Far Right. And they even had to edit their description, saying, "This video is about American funding for the Azov Battalion. It explicitly condemns Russian propaganda that Ukraine is a neo-Nazi country, quote-unquote. We stand strongly against Russia's invasion and will be publishing a video."
Oh, this is why I had to go back and look at the title. When I saw this video last week, they had already changed the title. Okay.
About the Russian oligarchy and the rise of Putin. They say they condemn Russian propaganda that Ukraine is a neo-Nazi country after having spent nearly 10 minutes priming you for that exact conclusion. They say,
Ukraine is still mired in a war on its territory, and the Russian government likes to use Ukrainian nationalists in its propaganda, part of its practice of painting all Ukrainians as Nazis. Of course, those claims aren't really true.
But then they spend the rest of the video telling you how it actually is true.
But Ukraine still does have a serious and militarized neo-Nazi problem. So since the 2014 uprising, Ukraine's far right has become increasingly...
This is like the part of the Gravel Institute video that's pretty reasonable. I mean, like what she just said is like the correct level of nuance to bring to the question. Did you watch the Bo video on Azov? No.
Increasingly powerful. Azov veterans have been given high positions in the security services. The new Ukrainian government even made it a criminal offense to deny Bandera's heroism. And in 2021, the United States and Ukraine were the only two countries to vote against a UN resolution condemning the glorification of Nazism. A climate
And okay, just in case you're missing it, in the background, like with half transparency, Adam something put in the definition of concern trolling, the action of disingenuously expressing concern about an issue in order to undermine or derail genuine discussion.
Of impunity has developed around far-right violence. Attacks against Roma and gay people go unpunished. A 2018 report found that Ukraine had more incidents of anti-Semitic hate crimes than all other post-Soviet republics combined.
That last article they show there is particularly interesting. Report: Ukraine had more anti-Semitic incidents than all former Soviet countries combined, on the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. This report comes from the Israeli Ministry for Diaspora Affairs. A striking exception in the trend of decrease in anti-Semitic incidents in Eastern Europe was Ukraine, where the number of recorded anti-Semitic attacks was doubled from last year and surpassed the tally for all the incidents reported throughout the entire region combined, the report said. So that sounds rather alarming. However, further in the article you'll find this bit. In an article published Saturday on Radio Liberty, a Ukrainian state historian dismissed the Israeli report as anti-Ukrainian propaganda, and a researcher of anti-Semitism from Ukraine said the Israeli report was flawed and amateurish. The researcher, Vyacheslav Likachev, who is affiliated with the VAD Association of Jewish Communities and Organizations of Ukraine, suggested in the article that the report's authors merely summed up the incidents they found reported online in a, quote, blatant lack of professionalism and violation of all standards of hate crime documentation, which are guided by professional monitoring groups both in Ukraine and in the world, end of quote. Gravel Institute, of course, never mentioned this bit. But here, I also found this article on the Jerusalem Post.
Okay, the concern trolling thing, I think is facetious from Adam something. It is fair if you're trying to, if you perceive a threat, a potential threat in the rise of the far right in a country. It is fair to look at how hard it is, like what was this article? This articles about how hard it might be to how it might become harder to criticize Bandera or Nazis. The fact that they don't want to condemn Nazis in that like international UN vote thing. I think those are absolutely fair articles to bring up by the Gravel Institute in a video on whose topic is Ukrainian Nazis. I don't, and he doesn't. Okay, he addresses the last article that was brought up, because apparently the data is contested, which is a fair thing to bring up. But the rest, he's just going to gloss over it. Those are absolutely fair points to bring up by the Gravel Institute.
Boris Loshkin, Ukraine's least anti-Semitic country in Central Europe. In addition to serving as president of the Jewish...
Yeah, this is the article I'd seen. I don't know if it's the Jerusalem Post article that I'd seen, but I'd seen this article in like different forums that Ukraine's anti-Semitic crimes in like most statistics I've seen are actually some of the lowest in the entirety of Eastern Europe. That is what I'd seen. So yeah, like it's absolutely fair to contest that last article that the Gravel Institute quoted. Seems to be a very contested idea, or in general. I know all the research I did on the topic, it seemed like Ukraine is actually doing really fucking well compared to other countries of the same kind when it comes to anti-Semitic hate crimes.
Federation of Ukraine, Loshkin is also a vice president
so
of the World Jewish
on
Congress
this part, I
and
agree
the
with Adam
Eurasian Jewish
something.
Congress and works intensively with the European Jewish community. Loshkin says that today, Ukraine is regarded as the least anti-Semitic country in Central Europe and is a much more open and accepting society. The relationship between Jews and Ukrainians is very tolerant and it is a safe country for Jews, he says. The Ukrainian Jewish community is very active. There are many Jewish organizations, both religious and non-religious. There are Jewish centers, Jewish schools, and kosher restaurants. And now there are even battle rabbis fighting the Russians, I might add. The Pew Research Center actually did a survey in Eastern Europe asking respondents if
this is the fucking thing I'd seen, the Pew Research polling of Ukraine. Percent of adults who say they would not be willing to accept Jews as citizens of their country. It's only 5% in Ukraine. It's the lowest stat of like the entirety of Eastern Europe.
Be willing to accept Jews as citizens of their country. Only 5% of Ukrainians agreed with this, making them the most tolerant country in the area. In contrast, 14% of Russians wouldn't accept Jews as Russian citizens. So there you have it. Ukraine is not exactly an anti-Semitic hellhole as the Gravel Institute or the Russian government would want you to think. But it's not a coincidence that the denazification of Ukraine was the primary excuse for Russia's invasion. That's the reason why Gravel Institute had to edit the video's title, by the way, to not make it too obvious that they're shamelessly peddling Russian state propaganda, while at the same time insisting that they don't. In the comment section, a user even pointed out the glaring contradiction in their video. The explanation of the East-West split is useful, but it seems odd to talk about Ukraine's far-right without also talking about Russia's far-right. The Russians aren't the defenders of leftist rebels, they are the gangster capitalists mentioned earlier in the videos. There's arguments to be had about whether arming the Ukrainians is the correct approach to this situation, but the framing of the arguments in this video makes it seem like the Russians are justified in supporting rebels, which is strange considering the main pillar of this video is about how America is not justified in its support. And Gravel Institute actually responded to this, saying, "That's very true. We focus on US stuff just because we're based in the US, but we obviously don't support Russian aggression and imperialism in Ukraine. We'll do a video about Yanukovych, the Donetsk clan, and gangster capitalism, Akhmetov comes to mind, in the future too. They obviously don't support Russian aggression and imperialism in Ukraine," they say, under their video justifying Ukrainian aggression and imperialism in Ukraine. And their Twitter record is similarly checkered. On the 27th
I don't know about this. Look, I'm someone who really wants it to be possible to speak out about the problems in Ukraine with nuance. Armenia was 32%, Jesus Christ, yeah.
2nd of February, 2 days before the Russian invasion, they tweeted, Two things can be true at once. 1. Russian aggression in Ukraine is absolutely unjustified and should be condemned. 2. American and NATO involvement has only made the situation worse. So once again trying to both sides their way out of the situation. You know, a local domestic serial abuser is threatening to kill one of his ex-girlfriends and loiters around her house with a shotgun, and then Gravel Institute comes along and points out how what he's doing is unjustified and should be condemned, but also how the local anti-domestic abuse league has only made things worse because now the man feels unsafe because of them. And then, when the Russian invasion began, Gravel Institute tweeted the following: "The heroic efforts of anti-war protesters in Russia deserve the unconditional support of the international left. Also, ordinary Russians and Ukrainians do not want war. Putin's invasion is an evil act that will destroy the lives of innocent Ukrainians, will plunge Russia into economic desperation, and will bring the world closer to the brink of nuclear annihilation." So that's nice. At least they're admitting that the invasion is bad, unlike a lot of their followers underneath their tweets. However, there's also this tweet from the 16th of February. Remember a few days ago when the media said that Russia was going to invade Ukraine today? Whatever happened to that? Now, I won't find this tweet on their page anymore because they deleted it, but people took screenshots, so we get to enjoy it even now. So up until the invasion, Gravel Institute towed the line that Russia invading Ukraine is Western propaganda, and then they had to backtrack like crazy, deleting tweets, changing the title of their video, and adding the following to the description. This is once again under a video spreading Russian propaganda that Ukraine is a neo-Nazi country, as Gravel Institute denied and both sides the invasion threat. So once again, which is it, Gravel Institute? You can't play this game forever, because people will call you out on it like I just did. Instead of edited titles, descriptions and clarifications, I would recommend deleting this video altogether. To fight a behemoth like Prager with huge ad budgets and millions of subscribers, you cannot really have content like this published, especially now, when it puts you in league with some of the most reprehensible people out there. You won't be bringing anyone—
So, for context, the Gravel Institute did delete the video. It's privated. It's no longer accessible. God, I would recommend Adam delete his video. At this point, since the Gravel Institute deleted their video, we probably should delete it too. Just erase all traces of this, okay? Now, I don't know. I still think he brought up some good points I still think Adam brings up some good points. There are a lot of things that are really bad in Adam's video. But man, fuck. Like looking, he brought out more bad points than Gravel. I was gonna say the opposite. I still think his video is in the fact checking that he does. I still think this video is better than the Gravel Institute's video. The Gravel Institute's video has some really fucking bad stuff in it. Some of it, Adam, something missed. I'm really proud of the fact that we figured out the whole misinformation about the GDP stuff, which for some reason Adam missed. Rip, Gravel privated that video. I would have wanted to watch it by myself before the Adam vid. Yes. It's still live on their Facebook. Interesting. I do think it's regrettable that it's no longer there for people who want to critique it or analyze it as well, but yeah.
Who work to the left with such content. In fact, you might actively scare people away from leftism with this. Gravel Institute also never talked about the fact that the pro-Russian party in Ukraine has had far larger support than the far-right, and how the latter only won a single seat in the 2019 elections. Inconvenient details, I suppose. As an aside, one of the chairmen of the pro-Russian party in Ukraine is Viktor Medvedchuk, Vladimir Putin's close confidant, who mysteriously disappeared from the country at the start of the Russian invasion in February 2022. While he was supposed to be in house arrest, by the way, on corruption charges. When Ukrainian authorities showed up to his palace, because of course he has one, they didn't find Medvedchuk, but they did find an exact replica of a luxury.
What did Adam say wrong? Some of the more egregious examples were he misquotes the Gravel Institute video on how many protesters there, on how many Nazis there were in the protests during the Maidan protests. The Gravel Institute video talks about columns of about a dozen protesters. Columns of about a dozen right sector Nazis moving through the protests. but says nothing about how many of them were in the protests. Then Adam something, like 5 minutes later, quotes the or misquotes it, saying but so you're saying they hijacked the movement, but there are only a dozen right sector people, which was never claimed in the Gravel Institute video. The Gravel Institute video never claimed there are only a dozen right sector people. It claimed they were moving. It didn't claim actually anything itself. It just clipped an excerpt from some documentary. It's someone else's voices saying it, where they're just talking about the columns of like several columns, but an unknown number of them, of like a dozen right sector Nazis moving through the protests. So that was like a really bad mistake from Adam. There were a couple others. Fuck. I would have to like scroll up in chat to see when Chao and Turnit get mad to find like the other ones. I really did like, I did not like the uncharitability he has for the statistic on, you should add him, Pepe. I could, yeah. I don't like the uncharitability he has for the life expectancy stat in Ukraine. The Gravel Institute compared Ukrainian life expectancy to Syria, Iraq, and North Korea, to show that the life expectancy in Ukraine was lower. And Adam something makes like a really convoluted, harebrained argument that this shows that the Gravel Institute is trying to show that that actually communism good. When to me it's very clear that all the Gravel Institute was doing was they were taking examples of countries that Westerners associate with being failed states, and showing that life expectancy was lower in Ukraine than in those countries, to show that the situation in Ukraine is not good for the people. That's not. He does bring up a fair argument in that the correct methodology in showing that there's a worse outcome in Ukraine would be to compare it to other Eastern European countries. That would be a better methodology on the side of the Gravel Institute, and that argument with Adam Somethings I agree with, but his accusation that the Gravel Institute was creating some like super dishonest thing with their comparison, I think is bad. It's like super uncharitable. And finally, this is actually the fucking low point of the video.
What else was the Ukrainian government?
So when he became interior minister, Avakov had the Azov battalion incorporated into Ukraine's National Guard.
So the Ukrainian military was in shambles as a war was going on in the east, fueled by Russia. In response, the Ukrainian government turned to the ultranationalists to help beat back the enemy. Then the Minister of Interior made the Azov battalion officially part of the National Guard. And my question here is, what else was the Ukrainian government was supposed to do? The country was falling apart, the separatists were spreading westward, their military was in shambles, and among the few forces you did have, you didn't know who's going to betray you for Russia. Then comes a group of highly motivated ultranationalists with weapons training, whose entire worldview is predicated on fighting Russian invaders and whose allegiance is unquestionably with Ukraine. And they tell you, give us weapons and support and we'll get shit done. What decision maker would say no to that? Even if you hate the far-righters, wouldn't sending them to war mean many of them would die? That would be a win-win, right? You help halt the Russian offensives and you end up with less ultranationalists in the end. And
this is such a bad argument from Adam something. Not the part about the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I mean, that's one thing, but I'm talking about the part where he says you send them to war, they die, and it's a win-win. Historically, every time you've had a country make an alliance with a group that has bad ideas, whether it's and armed them and gave them combat experience and support, it turns around to bite you in the ass. It's it's obvious to you too, right? That argument is really bad. What else was I gonna say? I do still side on Adam something when it comes to denouncing the fact that the Gravel Institute video did not correctly portray the time that the far right politicians were in power after the after 2000 in the interim government. I think Adam Something makes a good point about that being dishonest on the Gravel Institute's part. There were a couple others. I should have like made a list so I could like give a comprehensive conclusion to watching this video. Because Adam Something does bring up some really good points as well. It's not dishonest. You'll have to convince me on that. I view it as dishonest. Then he looks into Gravel Institute tweets. I don't remember where we were at in the video. We were like towards the end.
Like a lot of their followers underneath their tweets. However, there's also this tweet from the 16th of February. Remember a few days ago when the media said that Russia was going to invade Ukraine today? Whatever happened to that? Now, I won't find this tweet on their page anymore because they deleted it, but people took screenshots so we get to enjoy it even now. So up until the invasion, Gravel Institute toed the line that Russia invading Ukraine is Western propaganda, and then they had to backtrack like crazy, deleting tweets, changing the title of their video, and adding the following to the description. This is once again under a video spreading Russian propaganda that Ukraine is a neo-Nazi country, as Gravel Institute denied and both sides the invasion threat. So once again, which is it, Gravel Institute? You can't play this game forever, because people will call you out on it like I just did. Instead of edited titles, descriptions and clarifications, I would recommend deleting this video altogether. To fight a behemoth like Prager with huge ad budgets and millions of subscribers, you cannot really have content like this published, especially now, when it puts you in league with some of the most reprehensible people out there. You won't be bringing anyone over to the left with such content. In fact, you might actively scare people away from leftism with this. Gravel Institute also never talked about the fact that the pro-Russian party in Ukraine has had far larger support than the far-right, and how the latter only won a single seat in the 2019 elections. Inconvenient details, I suppose. As an aside, one of the chairmen of the pro-Russian party in Ukraine.
So this is part of the things that are weird, like looking back at the Gravel Institute video, it isn't showing this kind of statistics supporting, or rather, like if the Gravel Institute was actually super like pro, like trying to make like a super pro-Russian video, isn't showing that there is strong support for the pro-Russian party, wouldn't that go in that direction? Yo, it's the 17th day of Ukraine, still not being invaded, guys. Soy. You think Gravel gave the video to an underqualified team who wanted to say something controversial? Definitely some of the mistakes are that we've identified are just not proper methodology. Yeah, I wouldn't say they're politically motivated. I do want to be charitable with quite a few of the mistakes pointed out in the Gravel video. But I still think when it comes, for example, to those far-right politicians in the interim government, I still think it's really bad how they were portrayed. Wait, I'm confused. I thought Republicans were for Russia now. Is the spectrum just a circle? What generally super wrong thing has Hasan said now? That's the assumption I make because his takes have been shit for a fair while now, but what's the drama? I haven't yet even gotten to Hasan. Hasan got into a fight with Adam Something over this video, and I'm not yet done with this video. We haven't yet gotten to the Hasan stuff.
Is Viktor Medvedchuk, Vladimir Putin's close confidant, who mysteriously disappeared from the country at the start of the Russian invasion in February 2022, while he was supposed to be in house arrest, by the way, on corruption charges. When Ukrainian authorities showed up to his palace, because of course he has one, they didn't find Medvedchuk, but they did find an exact replica of a luxury Pullman dining car, custom built on-site from scratch, with even a little platform built for it. The car features copious amounts of luxury, including a golden tea heater, a gilded toilet complete with a golden butt rinsing shower, and otherwise all the expensive decorational items you can physically—
A golden bidet? Holy shit. That's true quality of life. Isn't Hasan somewhat pro-Russia? I don't know. Officially he's disavowed and criticized the invasion. But he's had some really bad takes on Russian aggression in general. That if you compile them together, you can paint him as being like kind of a Russian shill. But I don't think he is. I genuinely don't think he is. No. He just gets really taken. He just gets really easily taken into the U.S. bad explains my entire worldview mentality. Is how I would explain it. Okay, so with the Gravel Institute, like some far left propaganda, and they're hardcore Russia supporters, and Republicans are for. Okay, I understand what you're saying, Roser. Yes, there's something of a horseshoe theory going on where far left people and far right people in U.S. politics both support Russia. It's more that if supporting Russia provides an excuse to say America bad, that's what he'll do. And he's not endorsing Russia, yeah.
Cram inside that space. The Ukrainian Railways wants to nationalize the car, by the way, which I hope happens. It'll be the second largest loss for Medvedchuk after his yacht, because of course he has one, Royal Romance, was seized by Croatian authorities on the 16th of March. And this seems to be a recurring theme with pro-Russian politicians, doesn't it? Super yachts, gigantic palaces, ludicrous luxury. The main difference between Russia and Ukraine is that in Ukraine, these tend to get seized by the democratic government elected by the people. They also seized Yanukovych's palace after the Maidan and turned it into the Museum of Corruption, for example. You would think supposed leftists would be in support of a country where such things happen regularly, but they aren't, because supporting Ukraine would mean indirectly supporting the US, and they can't do that because US bad. Political philosophy. Anyway, thank you for watching. This was my video about the Gravel Institute and their lovely video. And do check out my Patreon if you think this content is worth your money. And I'll be seeing you next time.
The rocket. Oh yeah, Hasan's rocket attack in Iraq take was so bad too. So then Hasan watched this Wall Street Journal article. No, wait, I'm not done yet. There's a whole arc to cover Soap and Milton. Okay, I can like queue up your videos to watch later and articles. Wait, there was an article from Soap as well.